Hola, muy buenas tardes. Soy Dumashi Amable y este es Desahogamiento, mi programa. This week is part 4 of La Mezcla Gente. And I did get a couple direct messages. They said, ¿por qué está leyendo cuando estás en tu silla? Y la razón es porque tengo dos hijos y no recuerdo muchos de mis pensando si no tengo mi diario. Lo siento muchísimo, disculpe, pero necesito eso. Gracias. If you joined us for part 3 last week, we started to dive deep into the psychology of displacement. We've been talking about that for a few weeks and how we can nurture the Latinx community in Minnesota. And then we also talked about uh, some different success stories, notably Marco Rubio and the footprint that he's made on the scene for Latin Americans who have become generationally American. So we also talked about what it feels like to leave a piece of your soul in a different time zone, and we talked about the American dream and coincidentally dreamers in the United States of America. So today we're going to get into a little bit more of the mezcla, the physical and cultural alchemy that happens when different genetics and lineages collide. The epitome of La Mezcla Gente, which, for all of the colonization that has happened in the United States and for the people that have come from all different places, I think in the purest sense, the travelers who voyaged transatlantically to the United States, which many people refer to in the classroom as the forefathers of American history. I think the ideal purest sense was La Mezcla Gente, to come to a new space and start a new life. And so let's talk about what that looks like today, La Mezcla Gente. So there's a very notable mixed identity, mixed race person who I'm not sure if she's become a United States citizen. I'm not sure if she was ever interested in that, but Shakira. Shakira is the epitome of La Mezcla Gente in South America. So people, know her from her early hits as My Hips Don't Lie. But if you really take a look at it, she is a masterclass in global fusion. She was born in Barranquilla, Colombia, and her father is of Lebanese descent. And then her mother is of Colombian descent, notably with Spanish and Italian roots. Barranquilla es una ciudad de puertas abiertas. It's a port city, a place where the Middle East met with the Caribbean. You hear it in Shakira's music, that belly dance undulation mixed with the rock and Espanol. So for Shakira's journey, she didn't become an overnight celebrity. She wasn't an overnight crossover into the United States music scene. She dominated the Latinx market for over a decade before her album Laundry Service dropped in 2001. She actually had to learn English from scratch to come to the United States, proving that La Mezcla isn't just about genes, it's about a labor of translation. And that really ties into some of the colder realities of migrating over to the United States that we talked about over the last couple of weeks. I talked about the difference between recognizing someone who is struggling to learn English, just like Shakira had to nurturing Spanglish as a language of love and as a language bridging, North and South America. So we talked about the wet foot, dry foot policy ending in 2017, and then the migration patterns from Colombia, similar to Cuba, have also shifted. While wet foot, dry foot specifically impacted Cuban migration, its termination actually signaled a broader tightening of U.S. borders. So the U.S. came up with, all of these reasons to close Cuba up again. But there's also significant impact from Colombia, where Shakira is from. The Colombian encounters at the U.S. border have surged significantly since 2021. Over 150,000 encounters in the fiscal 2023 year alone, as people are immigrating from Colombia due to internal conflict and economic instability. So I'll just point out to you too, we did meet with Carla Santiago recently. She is un abogado aquí en ese lugar en Minnesota, in Minnetonka. Carla Santiago es de Santiago Legal, y si necesitas ayuda con tus derechos o visas o otras cosas de of the law, por favor, llamado con Carla a 612-810-7403, or you can see her on Instagram at Santiago Legal. All right, so we also have another notable celebrity who has a tremendous mezcla gente background. We have Anya Taylor-Joy and her invisible, what we would call invisible mezcla. She looks like a porcelain doll from the 19th century, but listen to her speak Spanish. Es pura de Argentina. She was born in Miami, here in the Los Estados Unidos, but she was actually raised in Buenos Aires until she was 6 years old. Her heritage is a mix of Scottish, English, and Spanish Argentine. She often likes to speak about the trauma of moving to London and refusing to learn English for 2 years because she wanted to go home. I work with some different people in the social work field who actually have very close connections with the schools in Columbia Heights, where we saw some absolute tragedies happen to kiddos over there due to immigration policies with Operation Metro Surge. And a close friend of mine who I go to school with, who I'm graduating with, understands that sometimes kiddos who've immigrated here, when they came to school, they didn't feel like speaking English. They just didn't. It wasn't a language that they felt comfortable or moved by. They wanted to go home in a lot of ways, but then they didn't want to go home. And so I'll just take a moment here to recognize that, you know, someone like Anya Taylor-Joy, who is from perhaps a completely different life circumstance, right? She has a completely different human condition, but she too had that feeling that our local kiddos in Columbia Heights might still be having, where she doesn't feel like speaking English. And I think that's really important for us to nurture as a community, is that, you know, a lot of these kiddos who came here, that's not their first choice, but their parents have brought them here to give them a better life. And Minnesota is just such a wonderful place that we can be good neighbors and be good friends to people and nurture the fact that sometimes maybe they don't feel like speaking English. So we'll look at Argentina a little bit here. The migration from Argentina to the United States still remains relatively low compared to other Latinx countries. But since 2017, going back to the end of the wet foot, dry foot policy, there has been what they would call a steady brain drain. Roughly 200,000 Argentines currently reside in the United States, but most of them arrive on professional visas, as the Argentine peso, their currency, faces historic inflation. So one more country I'd like to talk about today is the crisis right next door in Venezuela and the friction with the United States. There's been some not so popular commentary coming right out of Minnesota about the interactions of the US and Venezuela. And honestly, no sé cuál es la verdad ahora, no sé. Pero no podemos hablar con la mezcla gente o emigración sin la elefanta en la huerta. The relationship between the United States and Venezuela is currently, I would say, frozen. It is frozen in tension. Since the closure of wet foot, dry foot, the irony is palpable. I can feel it. While the Cubans lost their fast track, the Venezuelans became the new face of the U.S. border crisis. We're looking at a geopolitical stalemate. The United States maintains a heavy sanction on the Maduro administration, yet there is a desperate cyclical need for Venezuelan oil. So this is impacting the entire world. The Venezuelan oil is a huge crisis that I can't even begin to break apart. That's outside the realm of things I think that I'm capable of understanding. But it is arguably the current Cold War. It's fought with visas, and it's fought with humanitarian paroles. Since 2017, over 7 million people have fled Venezuela. I think you heard me mention Colombia saw a surge in 2021 of 150,000. Argentina, not so much, but with the currency facing some inflation at the time, there's been about 200,000 since 2017. But since 2017 in Venezuela, it's 7 million people. Think about that for a moment. While most of the 7 million people stayed in different parts of South America, the U.S. border encounters with Venezuelans jumped from near zero in 2017 to over 200,000 in 2023. So it's closed. Es cerrado ahora con los Estados Unidos y Venezuela. The U.S. wants the resources, but struggles to accommodate the human beings produced by the crisis. So there's a lot of different dynamic things happening. You could be Shakira and grew up in Colombia. Your dad's Lebanese. She was forced to learn English so that she could disseminate her Latinx culture to the United States. And she was huge in Latin America, and then she came to the United States and she became an international superstar. Okay, she is a master class in the amount of energy it takes to break into the US market and be forced to learn English and just do it because that's what was in her heart. She wanted to speak Spanish and sing in Spanish to the entire world and tell everyone about her mezcla gente, her genes from Colombia, which hailed from Spain and from Italy, and then her father from Lebanon. And then you have a similar story in Anya Taylor-Joy. She was actually born in the United States in Miami, and then she moved to Argentina and then over to the United Kingdom. And she did the opposite. She did not want to speak English. So we have two contradicting stories with beautiful international recognition for the Spanish language and the Latinx community. And then you have the invisible people, the kids in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, who have to compromise. They don't get to choose if they want to speak Spanish or if they don't want to speak Spanish. So success in the United States for the mixed icons, these celebrities, often requires them to flatten their edges, to become a digestible version of their culture, which is similar to what many people face here in Minnesota. Shakira had to make her hair blonde, and Anya Taylor-Joy had to perfect her British accent. But the genes do not lie. They carry the history of the ports, the migrations, and the colonial collisions. So I leave you with this today. Es nuestra mezcla, es un pensando de una vida más pura, or is it about survival? In Minnesota, for sure. I think that's a question we should ask ourselves when we're with someone who might not be able to speak English at the moment, and maybe they prefer to speak Spanish. But what can you do to lend your hand and lend your ear to someone and help them get where they need to be? This isn't Shakira. This isn't Anya Taylor-Joy. It's Tu Vecino. So what would you do if you were forced to leave the United States and speak a foreign language? I'll just leave you with that question this week. I would love to hear from you in my DMs with Minnesota Latinx Radio. And if you have a story that you'd like to tell on Desahogamiento, I would welcome you any day of the week to meet me down here in St. Paul so we can talk about it. Muchísimas gracias por tu tiempo hoy y hasta luego.